Well, folks, they're certainly becoming more upfront with the agenda, aren't they? This tweet is from Time magazine from the 23rd of October. The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab. And it's an image of the world being reconstructed. I mean, come on. How much more evidence do you need that the world is supposed to be massively reordered after the COVID crisis? Because to rebuild a new world order, you have to tear down the old one. And that can only be done with some kind of crisis. Almost like the crisis itself was part of the re-engineering process. So, let's connect a few more dots in this global plan. Beginning with this video from 2016 from Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum. 8 predictions for the world in 2030. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. Imagine that. Imagine the total abolition of private property rights. Gee, I hope there's no truth to that recent leak out of Canada that talked about the IMF cancelling everyone's debt in exchange for surrendering our right to private property and assets forever. This is basically Marxism. The state will own everything, including you, because in this Chinese-style Great Leap Forward, human beings have no bodily sovereignty. You may have already realized this, given that face masks are mandatory in many places. Yes, they can determine what you wear, and how the vaccine is inevitably going to be mandatory through coercion also. Now, historically speaking, who else was never allowed to own anything? Slaves. And you know who else wore masks? Slaves. You know, it's almost as if the technocrats at organizations like the World Economic Forum believe that human beings are nothing more than cattle to be muzzled, vaccinated, controlled, and monitored, and to be forbidden from having freedom and anything meaningful in their lives. By the way, just to remind you, we never voted for these people. Anyway, everything I'm picking up from the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the UN's Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals project, it sounds an awful lot like global communism to me. The idea that you won't own anything is simply priming you for extreme levels of poverty. Whatever you want, you'll rent and it'll be delivered by drone. So everything is going to be a subscription model, apparently, thus making people locked into a system where they're perpetually dependent on business models that generate continuous repeat business for corporations. If people can't own things or own their home, then they can't ever truly be independent and self-reliant. And because people are slowly getting used to having things delivered, shopping online, well, they don't want people moving around and shopping outside in brick-and-mortar stores. So you can see here that the lockdown was getting people acclimatized to that. It had nothing to do with a virus. Now, how do you think that you could sell all of this absurdity to the general populace? Well, if you completely destroy all small to medium business, which is currently happening, and SMEs are, of course, the engine of your nation's economy, and you destroy their economic independence, and you make millions and millions of people around the world unemployed, and therefore dependent upon the state, and you drastically diminish their material resources and wealth, you obliterate people's savings, destroy their currency, and break down international supply chains for essential things like food, for example, well, they will obviously have descended into abject poverty at that point. So the globalists can then sell them any horrific new socio-economic situation, and they'll have no choice but to accept it, because it'll be a case of accept it or starve. Sounds like communism to me. And where there's communism, there is immense human suffering, poverty, starvation, and enormous amounts of death. The US won't be the world's leading superpower. A handful of countries will dominate. As you can see, this is purely about the destruction of the Western world, democracy, and the free market itself. You'll eat less meat. They want to take red meat out of our diet because it's a great source of protein, and for men it boosts testosterone. This video may have been made in 2016, but you can see how this particular agenda blatantly plays into the current COVID nonsense. For example, look at all the meat processing plants and meat packaging plants and factories shut down across the world. Not Amazon warehouses, by the way. This is part of a plan to negatively impact upon food supply chains, in particular our meat supplies. Alleged positive COVID-19 outbreaks and positive PCR tests in these industries just conveniently suits the long-term agenda of the globalists to disrupt the distribution of meat. An occasional treat, not a staple, for the good of the environment and our health. Isn't it great when power elites get to determine what you can put in your body or what gets put in your body? Sort of like a vaccine that kills less people than the flu. But this is the same World Economic Forum that told us back in 2018 the 5 foods we would be eating in the future. Cricket bars and insects, which, by the way, are not a staple of any nation's diet anywhere in the world. They are a delicacy in some very impoverished countries, though. But apparently now insects and soy-based bullshit meat, that's high in estrogen, by the way, is supposed to be a staple of our diet in the future, while an actual staple that we evolved to consume, red meat, is to be made a delicacy. It's completely ass-backwards and designed to weaken our health and make us more docile, feminized and malnourished, which has happened under every communist regime in history. Communists always mess with the food supply, creating shortages of basic necessities as part of controlling the means of production, in this case controlling the populace. Back in 2016, Klaus Schwab was interviewed in this video on YouTube for the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and he was talking about the glorious Fourth Industrial Revolution of his.
The Fourth Industrial Revolution will impact our lives completely. It will not only change how we communicate, how we produce, how we consume. It will change actually us, our own identity, and of course gives life to such policies and developments like smart traffic, smart government, smart cities. What we will see is that everything will be integrated into an ecosystem driven by big data and driven particularly by close cooperation also of governments with business, civil society. And this revolution will come at a breathtaking speed. It will be like a tsunami.
It will be like a tsunami. How would he know that? Unless there was going to be a major event that would take place in the next 4 years that would help to accelerate his plans.
And actually, it's not just a digital revolution. It's digital, of course physical, with nanotechnology, but it's also biological. And those 3 dimensions provides a particular force to this revolution. So what the World Economic Forum is doing is to promote this public-private cooperation to master the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Fourth Industrial Revolution will have multifold impacts. Of course, every industry will be digitalized, will be disintermediated, and has to define a new business model. But it's not only business which is affected, it's government which has to move over to agile government. It is society as a whole, with the danger of job losses, but also with the need to reskill and upskill people fast. So there's an impact on society.
So people will have to reskill, and every industry has to redefine a new business model. Just like what we're being told today under the new Great Reset, which is meant to reshape and re-engineer our entire society, or like what's outlined in this gigantic graph thingy about the Great Reset on the World Economic Forum website. You know what Klaus Schwab said in his book from 2018, Shaping the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Public-private data sharing agreements that break glass in case of emergency. These come into play only under pre-agreed emergency circumstances, such as a pandemic, and can help reduce delays and improve the coordination of first responders, temporarily allowing data sharing that would be illegal under normal circumstances. Wow, it's almost like he knew it was coming. In case any part of the Great Reset or the Fourth Industrial Revolution sounded similar to the UN's Agenda 2030 project, well, there's a good reason for that. This article is from June of 2019. World Economic Forum and UN sign Strategic Partnership Framework. The UN Forum Partnership was signed in a meeting held at United Nations headquarters between UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres and World Economic Founder and Executive Chairman Klaus Schwab to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The partnership identifies 6 areas of focus: financing the 2030 Agenda, climate change, health, digital cooperation, gender equality and empowerment of women, education and skills, to strengthen and broaden their combined impact by building on existing and new collaborations. So that would explain the close alignment of the UN and the World Economic Forum. I guess it was very helpful that the World Health Organization just happens to be an arm of the UN, the same World Health Organization that declared a pandemic in March of 2020, and that pandemic just happened to help create the kind of societal and economic upheaval and reordering that assists the UN and the World Economic Forum to accelerate their implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. You know, the same World Health Organization that has a history of faking pandemics in the past.
It is one of the greatest medical scandals of the century, according to a leading health expert in Brussels. The Council of Europe health chief has accused major pharmaceutical firms of organizing a campaign of panic and unduly influencing World Health Organization decisions. And with European countries now burdened with bills for millions of unwanted doses of the swine flu vaccine, he wants an investigation. Our science correspondent Tom Clark has this report.
If only the mainstream media were as skeptical today as they were 10 years ago.
Flu viruses can spread.
64,000 people dead, tens of thousands hospitalized, a country crippled by a virus. The predictions of the impact of swine flu on Britain were grim. The government's response, spending hundreds of millions of pounds on antiviral drugs and vaccines, adverts and leaflets. But 10 months into the pandemic, only 355 Britons have died, and globally, the virus hasn't lived up to our fears. Were governments misled into preparing for the worst? Politicians in Brussels are now asking for an investigation into the role pharmaceutical companies played in influencing political decisions that led to a swine flu spending spree.
There must be a process to get more transparency, how the decisions in the WHO, how they function, and who is influencing the decisions of the WHO, and what is the role of the pharmaceutical industry there. I'm very suspicious about the processes which are behind this pandemic.
The Council of Europe Committee want the investigation to focus on the World Health Organization's decision to lower the threshold required for a pandemic to be formally declared.
Is anyone else getting a very strong sense of déjà vu here?
The world is now at the start of the 2009 influenza pandemic.
When this happened in June last year, governments had to activate huge pre-prepared contracts for drugs and vaccines with manufacturers. They also want to probe ties between key WHO advisors and drug companies.
All I can say is, memories are very short.
Who is deciding what the risk is? Is it the pharmaceutical companies who want to sell drugs, or is it someone making a decision based on the perceived danger? In this case, it appears that the danger was vastly exaggerated. And was it exaggerated by the pharmaceutical companies in order to make money?
Sounds like the World Health Organization has cried wolf before, but this time, for some reason, they were successful. Anyway, let's move on. The following video was uploaded to the World Economic Forum YouTube channel on October 20th, just a week ago.
COVID-19 is one of the biggest crises of our time. It has impacted every single one of us, shaken our social systems, and disrupted every sector of our economies.
Yes, that's what Klaus Schwab has been saying the Fourth Industrial Revolution was going to do long before COVID-19 came along. Anyone who still thinks that the lockdowns, restrictions, economic destruction and loss of freedoms has anything to do with the pandemic and not about transforming the world and human behavior to an entirely new social and economic paradigm seriously needs their head examined.
The automation of work, combined with the global recession, led workers to lose their jobs at an accelerated pace compared to previous years. And this trend is expected to continue. The ongoing shift in the division of labor between humans, machines, and algorithms might displace 85 million jobs worldwide in the next 5 years.
Of course, we could just stop all of this and decide that certain levels of automation are not good for human beings and will only benefit the supremely wealthy.
While 97 million new roles, ones that are more adapted to this new task distribution, may emerge. By 2025, companies expect to displace roughly 6% of their total workforce. 1 in 2 workers will need reskilling, and those remaining in their current roles will need to update 40% of their skill set to adapt to the changing labor market.
Wait, hold on a second. You started this video off by talking about COVID-19, a virus. And now you've segued into talking about changes to the labour market and people having to adapt and reskill because of where the economy is going, because of the Great Reset or something. But what's any of this got to do with a virus if all of these plans were already in motion for years because of the Fourth Industrial Revolution? What you're talking about couldn't have less to do with COVID-19.
There is a way to collectively benefit from these challenging times. Decades of research have shown that the most valuable asset of any economy or company is its human capital.
Not people, not humans, human capital. Because in the minds of these types of organizations, everything and everyone must be broken down to their economic value. People are seen as just, I guess, cogs in the machine, drones, whose importance is determined based on their economic output. And human capital, I think, is a very dehumanizing phrase. You know? It's almost like humans are like other business resources or physical assets. Also, I think that the term human capital almost sounds like human cattle. Also, notice that everybody is wearing face masks in this office.
Around the globe, companies are already experiencing a shortage in relevant skills for future roles and are investing in reskilling and upskilling their workforce. By 2025, organizations say they will train over 70% of their employees to ensure they can smoothly transition into the jobs of tomorrow. These include DevOps engineers, artificial intelligence specialists, digital marketing managers, talent acquisition specialists, and customer success specialists.
The reason this video now has nothing to do with COVID, despite starting off talking about it, is because, this should be obvious now, the agenda was always the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The regulations and societal economic upheaval introduced in the wake of COVID over the past 7 months have nothing to do with the virus and everything to do with transitioning the entire planet into an entirely new world order.
It will take on average between 2 weeks and 5 months for workers to pick up new skills, allowing them to move into these new roles. But data shows they won't need to have the perfect skill set to start transitioning. While 2/3 of employers expect to get a return on investment in employees' reskilling programs within just 1 year, governments will also need to step in to update and fund education and training systems and to ensure displaced workers have adequate safety nets. With purposeful leadership and collaboration.
Notice the face masks again. See, the face masks are supposed to be permanent, even after the so-called pandemic is over. Just like that stupid elbow bump, which to me is like the new Nazi salute. The face masks are an oppressive symbol of the new revolution, the changing face of the enslaved human race. This entire video is just daft. The idea that millions of people around the world will be able to seamlessly transition into new tech-based roles is simply absurd. Not everyone has the skill, aptitude, inclination, or interest for IT-based roles and sitting in front of a computer screen all day long. Some people's skills and talents lie in more traditional types of work, and that's where they thrive. Those who work in retail or people-facing jobs, blue-collar work, etc. How are these people, especially those in their 50s and 60s, supposed to be able to keep up and retrain and reskill into highly technical roles? The Fourth Industrial Revolution will make millions of human beings obsolete in the job market because ultimately, with automation taking away millions of jobs, only the most high IQ technical roles will be left. Now, here's a very interesting article from the World Economic Forum from 2016. Does capitalism need some Marxism to survive the Fourth Industrial Revolution? So let's have a read of this. Summer Davos returns to Tianjin, China next week with an almost apocalyptic feel as attending leaders and technology pioneers debate what life will look like following the robot-driven Fourth Industrial Revolution. This is a recurring theme for the World Economic Forum, whose founder, Professor Klaus Schwab, made the term the title of his new book about the future of capitalism. Schwab believes that, unmanaged, the fourth industrial revolution has the potential to decimate global employment levels through productivity advances inspired by breakthroughs in robotics. Unlike the previous three industrial revolutions, which the professor lists as the transport and mechanical production revolution of the late 18th century, the mass production revolution of the late 19th century, and the computer revolution of the 1960s, Schwab endows the fourth wave of creative disruption with the potential of seeing off mass employment altogether. No doubt students of capitalism will be experiencing a pang of déjà vu about now, for it was Karl Marx himself that first grappled with capitalism's internal contradictions sometime between the first and second industrial revolutions. Marx observed that capitalists paid workers less than the value of their labour in order to make a profit. When expressed cumulatively, it meant workers would be unable to afford the very goods they produced in the first place. As a result, capitalists turned to issuing government and worker debt, thereby kicking the contradiction down the road. The most famous of which saw early 20th century industrialist Henry Ford pay his employees $5 per day, twice the average wage for automakers in 1914. In his 1926 book, Today and Tomorrow, Ford laid bare his reasoning. The owner, the employees, and the buying public are all one and the same, and unless an industry can so manage itself as to keep wages high and prices low, it destroys itself. For otherwise, it limits the number of its customers. One's own employees ought to be one's own best customers. But 90 years and one industrial revolution later, how on earth do we translate Ford's interwar reasoning to an impending age of human displacing robotics? Specifically, how can we make more from wages without pricing labour out of an automated market? One option is to literally make employment cheaper by scrapping all income taxes and shifting the shortfall to taxes on land value, corporate profits, natural resources, and hydrocarbon energy generation. So, I could be wrong here, but it sounds to me like one of the ways in which they intend to seize private property is to place taxes on the value of the land. I also want to say that capitalism has been the best way of lifting an enormous amount of people out of abject poverty. It's also created an independent middle class, which is now currently being destroyed by Marxists. Incomes could be increased via more of us owning shares in the companies we work for or buy from. Such a vision invites more diverse forms of ownership in an economy. Oh man, nothing ever changes with this kind of ideology. Yes, it's the utopian dream of Marxism. We all own everything. Therefore we own nothing, and wealth is redistributed, which is to say they come for your money and your stuff. And finally, there is the option, currently being touted around Europe, that governments pay a basic monthly salary to all citizens. Aside from the shock value, it seems somewhat odd that governments currently engaged in slashing budgets for public services would suddenly find colossal funds to subsidize mass consumption. What they're referring to here, of course, is universal basic income. For now, that is, the type of technical advances promised by the fourth industrial revolution could see the cost of production fall way below prices currently offered by Chinese manufacturers to the rest of the world. But does the Chinese government really want to see hundreds of millions of its factory workers usurped by AI-enabled production line robots? Not that it matters. Logic dictates that such robots would inevitably be eating through order books elsewhere. Hence, the cross-pollination of ideas between capitalism and Marxism is worthy of serious discourse. A future characterized by mass unemployment, gross inequality, and unrest demands it. It should be very clear to you now that the governments of our countries are not in charge. Organizations like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations are. Our politicians merely follow the script and instructions given to them. If your country is currently in lockdown and going along with the COVID-19 restrictions and narrative, it means one thing. You are in the midst of a Marxist communist takeover. If you needed any more proof that the COVID regulations have nothing to do with controlling a virus and everything to do with controlling human beings, this article is from the BBC. COVID in Wales. Supermarket rules will not be reversed. Rules banning shops selling non-essential items during Wales' firebreak lockdown will not be reversed. First Minister Mark Drakeford has said. On Sunday afternoon, Mr. Drakeford said the implementation of the rules may be tweaked, but the basic decision behind the ban was the right one. Who determines what items are essential or not? If a person needs something, it's essential to them. A petition on the issue has exceeded 60,000 signatures, making it the largest ever submitted to the Senate. The Welsh Conservatives earlier said the rules were mixed messaging That's an understatement. Supermarkets have been told they can only sell essential items and must close parts of their stores which sell products such as clothes, shoes, toys and bedding during Wales' 17-day firebreak lockdown. Whatever a firebreak lockdown is. These new terms they make up every other week are ridiculous. You know, it's strange. I'm pretty sure clothes, shoes and bedding are essential items. And who gets to determine what items are essential or not? The same people, I guess, who are determining that it's not essential that you get to see your elderly dying loved one in a care home in their final moments. The same people deciding that your business must be closed and you cannot reopen. The same people determining what activities are essential and non-essential and what jobs are essential and non-essential. The same people determining how far you're allowed to travel from your home. Soon they will likely tell us what foods are essential and non-essential. You see where that's going? And perhaps in the years to come, they will tell us what people are essential and non-essential. I guess the so-called human capital who offer value to the Fourth Industrial Revolution will likely be seen as essential, and those who are deemed to have no benefit to the regime's plans will be deemed non-essential and may have a very undesirable fate. The evil behind this agenda is just absolutely unbelievable. Such is the way under communism or any technocratic society. They're now telling people what products they're allowed to buy in shops. Why? What has banning the sale of clothes got to do with stopping a virus? Well, obviously, absolutely nothing. Now in Ireland, they're doing the same thing, as Leo Varadkar explains. This article is from extra.ie. Leo Varadkar confirms supermarkets are not allowed to sell clothes or toys during Level 5. Taoiseach Leo Varadkar has confirmed that supermarkets selling clothes and toys are breaking the law and will be punished by Gardaí. Under Level 5 restrictions introduced earlier this week, all non-essential retail outlets and shops were forced to close. Only stores selling essential items such as food, medicine or takeaways can stay open. Are takeaways essential items? Okay. However, it has been suggested that a number of shops that fall under the essential retail classification have continued to sell non-essential items. Taoiseach Leo Varadkar has now confirmed that essential retailers need to put non-essential items away. This is just daft. He noted that the Gardaí will be able to punish retailers who are selling items that they should not be. Speaking on RTE Radio 1's This Week, the Business and Enterprise Minister said that this behaviour is unfair on shops that were forced to close on Wednesday evening. Retailers need to abide by regulations, and you need to abide by the spirit of the regulations, Minister Varadkar explained. If you are a mixed retailer, you should separate your stock and only sell items that are essential. If you are a supermarket or a big store that has groceries and clothes, you should separate off the clothes and not sell them. Workwear is okay, but general clothing is not. We have been in touch with the Gardaí, and that will be enforced. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is all about the upcoming digital age of humanity, working online from home, socializing at home on a computer screen, because apparently that's socializing now, telemedicine, etc. But obviously a big one is online retail. Buying online will increase exponentially, as I'm sure it already has throughout the lockdown. The world outside is becoming an increasingly unpleasant place to be. You may have noticed. People are afraid. All social life, fun, joy, entertainment, it's all gone outside. There's no pubs or restaurants or cinemas to go to. Leisure pursuits are greatly diminished. Travel is hugely restricted in terms of how far you can travel from your home. And meeting up with friends and family is becoming, well, very difficult indeed, with police stopping you at checkpoints, asking where you're going, and potentially hitting you with a fine and criminal prosecution if they don't like the answer. It's fair to say that this ban on the sale of what are deemed to be non-essential items in brick-and-mortar retail stores will only benefit the likes of Amazon and other massive online retailers, and I suspect that is one of the motivations behind this policy. As with all communist revolutions, Christianity is seen as a threat, and religious worship has to be banned, apparently. This is because communism seeks to become the religion of the state, where there is no higher authority than the tyrannical rule of man. This article is from Ireland, and it's from the Iona Institute.ie. Clergy who hold acts of public worship can go to prison under new COVID measures. Under new COVID restrictions passed into law last night in the Dáil, a priest can now be fined or imprisoned or both for saying Mass in public. The same applies to any minister of religion who holds a public act of worship. This is drastic, draconian, and unacceptable, and must raise questions about the constitutionality of the measure, quite apart from its total disproportionality. Aside from Wales, the Republic of Ireland appears to be the only place in Europe where public worship has stopped, and in our case, now attracts penal sanctions. Prior to this pandemic, when did such a law exist in Ireland? You have to go back to penal times. Last night, new regulations SI 448 of 2020 became law. Article 8 of these regulations prohibits various events broadly defined. The term includes religious services with an exception for funerals. Contravention of the prohibition is an offence, and the relevant part of the regulations is a penal provision allowing for the imposition of criminal penalties on the organiser of an event, such as a priest celebrating a mass attended by any members of the public. The penalties include a fine, imprisonment, or both. Finally, not to leave our American friends out of the loop, a story from the US, California. State of California Health and Human Services Agency, California Department of Public Health. Subject: Guidance for private gatherings. This is guidance for private gatherings. Mandatory requirements for all gatherings. All persons planning to host or participate in a private gathering, as defined above, must comply with the following requirements. Local health jurisdictions may be more restrictive than this guidance. Refer to your local guidance for what is allowed in your area. Attendance. Gatherings that include more than 3 households are prohibited. Amazing that people are just rolling over and accepting this. This includes everyone present, including hosts and guests. Remember, the smaller the number of people, the safer. Well, actually, if you can't have large gatherings, the safer it is for the state, because that way it's harder for political dissidents to get together. Oh, sorry, did I actually cut through the bullshit there? Sorry, yeah, it's just about a virus, bro. It's just about a virus. Keep the households that you interact with stable over time. I don't know how you're supposed to have a stable household, given the fact that we now live in a clown world, and this is an extremely stressful time where human beings are basically being subjected to torture and psychological warfare. By spending time with the same people, risk of transmission is reduced. Participating in multiple gatherings with different households or groups is strongly discouraged. The host should collect names of all attendees and contact information in case contact tracing is needed later. It's truly incredible, folks, the amount of ground that the public have now ceded to their governments around the world. The fact that people actually acquiesce to laws and policies curtailing what they can do, even in the privacy of their own home, and who is allowed in their home, and how many people they're allowed to gather with indoors and outdoors. Unreal. Gather outdoors. Gatherings that occur outdoors are significantly safer than indoor gatherings, and also much easier for the police to monitor. Oh, sorry. Was I cutting through the bullshit again? All gatherings must be held outside, where we can see you. Sorry. Attendees may go inside to use restrooms as long as the restrooms are frequently sanitized. Isn't that nice? California. Gatherings may occur in outdoor spaces that are covered by umbrellas, canopies, awnings, roofs, and other shade structures, provided that at least 3 sides of the space, or 75%, are open to the outdoors, because these are the requirements for COVID to leave you alone, and if they're not there, then COVID will attack you, I suppose. Now, much of these guidelines are about as absurd as other guidelines that you've seen in other countries, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. 7. Rules for singing, chanting, and shouting at outdoor gatherings. Singing, chanting, shouting, and physical exertion significantly increases the risk of COVID-19 transmission, because these activities increase the release of respiratory droplets and fine aerosols into the air. Because of this, singing, chanting, and shouting are strongly discouraged. But if they occur, the following rules and recommendations apply. They're actually now trying to literally police how you express yourself in public. All people who are singing or chanting should wear a face covering at all times while singing or chanting, including anyone who is leading a song or chant, because these activities pose a very high risk of COVID-19 transmission. Face coverings are essential to reduce the spread of respiratory droplets and fine aerosols. People who are singing, shouting, chanting, or exercising are strongly encouraged to maintain physical distancing beyond 6 feet to further reduce risk. People who are singing or chanting are strongly encouraged to do so quietly at or below the volume of a normal speaking voice. Yes, because COVID can hear now. Okay, if you're too loud, it'll come after you. So be quiet. Just whisper, or COVID will hear us. Instrumental music is allowed as long as the musicians maintain at least 6 foot physical distancing. Musicians must be from one of the 3 households. Playing of wind instruments, any instrument played by the mouth, such as a trumpet or clarinet, is strongly discouraged. Look, there's lots of jokes you can make here, but sadly I'm not really in a joking mood because this is just incredibly disturbing that this is where we are. There's no real commentary required at this point. There's nothing that I could really say. I could call these rules draconian, absurd, but that goes without saying. Look, this is simply about gaslighting and demoralizing people. The regulating of every aspect of human behavior to this degree and the invasive nature of these rules is simply about one thing: narcissistic authoritarians trying to see what they can get away with, how far they can push people, how much they can bully, intimidate, and abuse the public. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this video up here, and I'm going to conclude by saying, because YouTube censorship is rife these days, with lots of people getting yeeted off for saying even less controversial things than I say, I would encourage you to go to a website called bitchute.com. Sign up over there. All of my videos are on BitChute, and BitChute is basically a free speech version of YouTube. It's YouTube without the censorship, and it works very well, and it's improving all the time, and they've recently improved their search function. So my BitChute channel is linked in the description box below, and I'm also on minds.com, which is like a free speech Facebook. You can also find my videos over there as well, and I'm on gab.com, and that's like a free speech Twitter, and my handle on both of those platforms, Minds and Gab, is at Dave Cullen. So it's very easy to find me over there, and I'll post regular updates. So if you're following me on those platforms, no matter what happens to my YouTube channel, you'll always be able to keep in touch and find out where you can find my latest videos. Like I say, my entire channel is backed up over on BitChute, and that's where all my new videos go to as well. Feel free to re-upload these videos on any platform that you like, and if you want to, you can add a translation. It always helps. I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.